Okay, right. I think I put 3 questions down. And the first one was, what is your reaction when you first held a published copy of your paperback when it arrived in the post? And Audrey, can I start with you?
Oh, sure. Let's see, that was in 2014. It was The Friendship of Mortals. And I had gotten, I'd hired a graphic designer to actually design decent covers, because my homemade covers before then were really seriously amateur looking. So it looked really good. And actually, I just felt sort of a sense of completion. Yeah. And I was thrilled, right? I mean, there's your book with your name on it, and it looked fairly professional and all that. So yeah, it was a thrill. That's all I can say. And I didn't find a typo instantly.
Well, I've never had that experience.
Who's that?
This is Mark. I've never had that experience of not finding any typos.
Oh, right. But you meant you'd never had a paperback in your hands, and I'm sure you have lots of them.
Yes, I have.
What was your first feeling?
So I just have to say that I don't remember, to be honest. And it's one of these things where I don't remember reactions or feelings through a lot of my life. I always refer to my childhood as this big black void that I just don't remember a lot of. But I'm trying to think. So I published a collection of short stories as an experiment, and then I published my first novel. And I don't know about the short stories, but I think, like Audrey said, it just felt like I had completed something. And for me, a lot of times when I complete something, I don't necessarily revel in it. It's okay, now what's next? And so I think, it was incredible, because I spent most of my adult life wanting to write a novel and not really ever doing it. And so once I did, and then I published it, it was like, wow, I actually did this. It's published, it's out in the world. And so it's a great feeling, but then it was, what's next?
Mm-hmm. Bertold.
I have never actually put one of my books into a paperback or physical format. I keep meaning to get around to that, but I've never done it, so I don't know what it would be like. I've read a lot of people who say things like they loved it when they first had that experience. It was like a magical experience. So I don't see why it would be, but having not done it, I'm curious. So someday I will, and I will be interested to know if I'm just blown away by it.
One thing about it, and one reason I've published all my books in print, is that way it's like safe, right? Print paper, there is print on paper, and unless the world burns down or floods, which could happen right these days, you know that some electronic blip isn't going to destroy your stuff.
It's funny. I love getting physical copies of books for exactly that reason. I have a lot of my favorite books in physical form, even if I read them in ebook, for exactly that reason. So you would think, but I don't know. I guess for some reason I'm like, well, with my books, I can always print it out if I need to or something. Is my thought.
Richard?
Oh, that leaves me. Yeah. Like Audrey said, definitely completion was the first thing, because that's what I had set out to do, just to complete something, the first thing in my life to really complete. But I have to say, there was something wonderfully magical about that moment. And I took it out of the box, and I don't know, everything that was just sort of, I think I'd like to, became real. It was having something tangible in your hand as an output of everything that started with thought. That was just, I don't know, I was just so blown away at that moment. That was 2016, I think, 17, 16. So we're coming up on that anniversary pretty soon too. Yeah, it was a wonderful feeling. Probably one of the best feelings I had in my life, I have to say. Just took me by surprise, because I knew it was coming, shipping and everything, and picked it up, and it had that smell, book smell.
Yeah.
And you can autograph it too and give it to somebody.
Yeah, that's what I I did. I wrote a bunch of publisher copies so I could start giving them out. It was really a great experience. So even the second book, it's I was surprised. Second book showed up, and I gotten plenty of copies of the first by that point. But even the second book was just like, wow, here it is, real. So
There is one thing though about copies. It's having a couple of copies of your book is great. But if you have, like, some people who would order like 100 copies, and they have this huge box and all these identical things, and that to me would be pressure. Like, because you obviously ordered 100 thinking you're going to sell them somehow. So it would be like a little sign saying, you got to sell, sell, sell. And of course, that drives me crazy. So author copies, I've always ordered maybe at most or 6 or 2.
I have a worse story than getting all those copies and then having to try to sell them. With my last book, I ordered 50 author copies. And after I ordered them and it was too late for me to cancel them, I discovered all the typos and formatting problems in the book. So now I have a box of 50 copies of that book sitting in my office, and I'm never going to do anything with them.
They're going to be rare collector's editions.
Yes, exactly.
Big.
Sign them quickly.
Yes, that's what I'm, because with the novel I published about a year and a half ago, I put on Facebook, anybody want an autographed copy, personal delivery, $10, and I got about 25 people, friends and family who did. So that's what I'm planning on doing this one. And I want to say, do you want the special collector's edition or do you want the boring normal one? So I was wondering, before you answer this question, Lucinda, for yourself, I was wondering, 4 of us do paperbacks. You do paperbacks too, right, Lucinda?
Yes.
So 4 of us do, 1 of us don't. In my experience, my paperback sales are probably less than 5% compared to my ebook sales. And I don't know if the others who've done both paperbacks and ebooks have the same experience, but given that, why continue publishing in paper?
I think probably from what Audrey says, that it's there, it's tangible, you can pick it up. I mean, I'm awful enough that I've actually, if I tilt this to one side, you will see that particular thing there are all my books, the ones that are flat on the side. So just hopefully anybody walking into the lounge might just sort of notice and say, oh, then I can take them into the back bedroom and show them on the shelves. I can give a copy to somebody who comes if I find they're a reader, or especially if they're going back to England or something like that. I did that with some cousins a while ago. I gave them a whole set of books, and they've actually got back to me with pictures of the book club that they go to, and they've taken the book there. So you can just a bit of marketing, I suppose, but also knowing that somebody's read it and they have enjoyed it. But the very first one I got in my hands, I thought, this was way back with the traditional publisher. I took one look at it and thought, oh no, it's awful. I really didn't like it. It was just, it's not how I envisaged it. I'd had no say in the cover. I'd had no say in the layout. I'd had no say in the graphic, internal stuff. But I was really quite chuffed when my first, the first one came from Amazon. I was quite excited. I was quite surprised to see that my other half was, I thought his eyes looked a bit shiny, to be honest. He'd done the formatting for me. And so he'd worked on it as well. And he'd actually designed the cover too. And I think he was a bit taken back with, I think he felt more about it than I did, to be honest, because he'd had a buy-in on it. And there it was, in black and white. But we have improved a lot since. Oh, and I'll cover that a bit later if it comes up. Anybody else got anything to say about that? Any second thoughts on it?
No, I think that's the ultimate completion of publishing a book, is to have a physical copy of it. And it's really handy if I'm doing something and I want to check something or other in one of my books, I don't dredge up the e-copy from anywhere, or e-reader, or on from my computer. I just go to the printed copy and have a look, because it's easy to flip through. So that's one thing. One thing I will never do, though, and that's publish in hardcover, even though you can now on Amazon. I think hardcovers are a separate thing altogether. They should only be for certain kinds of books that warrant hardcover, and I don't think anybody's novel really does. Now, mine certainly don't, so I'm happy with paperback.
Yeah, I agree with that. Anybody done
I-
hardcovers? No?
I'm not going to do them either. I mean, if I can't get people to buy a paperback for $10, how am I going to get someone to buy a hard copy for $20?
Yeah.
But I publish paperback, I think, for the same reason the two of you have mentioned. It's just nice to have a hard copy of it. And I also have friends and family who don't read ebooks. So the only way they're going to read my books is if they're available in paperback. And if you want your parents to read your book, then you got to make it in a form they're going to read it. So.
Yeah.
I have a couple of comments. One is I do have hardcovers, but that's because I was invited to be in a beta trial for Amazon. So I wanted to try it out and give feedback. So so I just did it. They're out there, but I don't think I've ever sold a hardcover. And I wasn't expecting it because, like Audrey said, it's not the kind of thing you expect a hardcover for. And my next book I probably won't bother. The other thing though is to Mark's point about selling. Overall, it is true that I've sold, and I have to put that in quotes, more digital than hardcover, but that's because every so often I do a giveaway. And I still make money on those because as people read those pages, Amazon has that thing wherever it is, and you get, some money from that. But to be fair, it surprises me that some years, like with my first book, especially, I think it was like the second or third year, I sold a lot of physical copies. I still don't quite understand why, because it's so much cheaper to buy the digital. But there are years that, I do outsell one to the other. But to answer your question of why bother, even if I didn't, is because, to be honest, if I got only one paperback sale and 100 digital, that's still one more sale.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't mean in terms of money, because let's face it, that's like $40 a year total I make on my books. But it's sort of like one more reader,
Right.
and that's the
Yep.
thing. I want the broadest range of readers I can get to.
The other
Yeah.
thing about that one paperback is the person that bought it might give it to someone. Or they might give it to their library, or it might even end up in a used bookstore and get bought again. Now you won't know about any of that, but it'll be some more people reading, and who knows?
And that's right, and that's my goal. That's like really what.
The one other thing I was going to add was as much I read probably more ebooks now than paperbacks. But even given that you can read books in ebook, a book is still supposed to be a book. That's what a book is supposed to look like and feel like. So why write these things and publish them if I'm not also going to have them in a book form?
Right.
We changed your mind, Bertold.
Yeah, I'm considering.
We should stop sharing our book formatting horror stories when we have to go through the paper.
Yeah, there is that.
Yes.
I had a little more trouble with the formatting on the digital than I did for the hardcover. Yeah.
Really?
So
Wow.
actually, the hardcover in all times went relatively smoothly. It was the digital versions that things were screwed up on pages. So, but you can, in both cases, you can just, at least on I published with Amazon. Well, it was CreateSpace originally, but you can go and correct it, and then the next time somebody orders one, so.
No, I've done the digital formatting. That I haven't had a problem with, but my other half does all the paper one, and he's sort of changed and improved as it goes along. It now has the name of the book on one side and the author on the top as a little thing at the top of the thing, which looks a little bit more professional, and the page numbers and the gutters are right now. He's got this notebook. It looks like a telephone directory for the whole of London, but never mind. It's got little bits and inches and little arrows and squiggles and that. He knows what he's doing, and he does the foreign language ones as well now. But as long as he can get hold of the separate take that layer off that has the actual title on. If you can do that, it depends on the cover designer. Sometimes she's happy to give it in pieces, sometimes some of them are not, which means you've got to go back to them and get them to separate the layers again.
Right.
But,
You reminded me that, in fairness, I have been using Word for ages in complex ways. So, that's why maybe it was easier for me, because doing the headers and stuff like that, and then transferring it into the whatever applet they give. I've had a lot of experience doing that before. So you're right. I'm probably not realizing the bias there. It could be challenging if you haven't.
No, I'm not sure where I'd start. I've got to look after him, because otherwise I won't get my books formatted. Right. Let's move on to, what's your biggest regret with writing? I mean, do you wish you'd never started, or did you feel compelled to start, or, what do you feel about it? Who wants to kick off with that one?
Yeah, go ahead. Who was that? Okay,
I
I'll
say,
continue. Is that I feel I have to keep doing it now to maintain my credibility, and I'm not sure I have it in me to do that. So that's pretty well it.
I mean, you've always wanted to write. Did you, Audrey?
Oh yeah, I did. And at first I didn't think I was, somehow I thought, well, you choose to be, either you're going to be a writer or you're going to do something else for a living. So I kind of went along and became a librarian and all this other stuff, and thought, well, I'm not going to be a writer. But then it sort of occurred to me, hey, I can do both. So, and I got totally obsessed with my first book and then the other books, and cranked them out. And now I'm sort of thinking I'm running out of gas here. I want to do something different, but I'm not sure what. And part of me just wants to kind of say, okay, I've been there, I've done that, that's it. And then I think, well, yeah, but that'll be sort of like admitting defeat or something. So that's my biggest regret, is once you start, how do you finish it? Like, do you have to keep writing till you fall dead, or what? Or can you just kind of say, okay, I'm done now?
Yeah, well, I know what you mean. Yeah. Berto, how long have you been writing? What made you start?
I've been writing fiction for about 8 years now. And I don't have regrets when it comes to writing fiction. However, I do have a major regret about my blogging, because when I started to blog, I wanted to be a political blogger. I don't know why. My only defense is I was young and stupid. But and I wasted so much time on that to no avail. I mean, my opinions were stupid. What I was on about, I was always like, oh, what's the latest controversy in politics? I'll write about that. And I look back and I go, I should have started doing this book reviewing stuff way earlier, like 10 years earlier than when I started, because I only really started doing that in like the last few years consistently. That's so much more rewarding. I enjoy it more. I think I get more readers. The people whose books I review enjoy it, and it's just so much better. So the bottom line of this story is, if there's some kid out there in college who's like, I'm going to be a political writer, don't do it. Write about like independent art or something, and you will enjoy it more. So that's my regret.
That's funny. I think I started following your blog. It must have been shortly after you stopped writing about politics. I'm going to have to go into your archives and see what I can find there.
Don't go in the archives. I was stupid, like I said.
We're all going to go and look now, Bertolt. Don't be daft.
Exactly.
You have a regret now.
I disavow everything Bertolt said prior to like 2017.
Anybody who doesn't know his blog address, ruinedchapel.com, go check out his archives.
Boy, I'm glad I edit these videos.
Cheat.
Bertolt does really good reviews. Like, I mean,
Yeah, he does.
even if you're not remotely interested in reading the book afterward, because it's just not your thing, the reviews are so well written, but they're just interesting to read.
Yep.
So I recommend.
Movies
and spoiler
films.
free. You do a great job with that.
Yeah.
You convey what the book is about, but you don't give the key parts away.
So Bertold, who do you review for?
Who do I review for? You mean like, do you mean like, do I do it for myself, or like who am I, who's my target audience? Is that the question?
No. I mean, do people send you books and ask for you
Oh, yeah.
reviews, or just what you choose to read yourself?
Basically just what I choose. Well, I think everyone knows I have a strong bias in favor of like indie books. If something has like more than 50 reviews on Amazon, I'm unlikely to review it, but I might, especially if it's by someone I know. But I try to actively seek out things that very few people have read and that seem weird or offbeat or just little known. Because so you're unlikely to ever see me like going, I think I'm going to review the latest Stephen King book or whatever, because everybody read it, everybody has their opinion on it. So what's the point? I'd rather find something different and unusual. And yeah.
But you do occasionally review a classic, which is kind of cool.
I do. I try every once in a while to do that. Often because I don't really like a lot of the classics. So that can be interesting.
Richard.
I am I'm not a regrets person to start with, so and that would be a topic for another day. I have a whole logic around regret. But I could say it would be a wish. I wish the tools for self-publishing were cheap and available many years ago, or I would have started probably in my 30s, because that's when I really started writing quite a lot. I mean, I used to write every so often, but I never saved any of that stuff either, because it wasn't different mindset. But I would have experimented. I was always sort of cutting edge in my life, so I would have experimented with it. I would have tried it. But back then, it was just a vanity publisher or change your career. And I loved my career back then. Not so much now. I really loved it. I didn't want to change it for anything. So yeah, I would have started in my 30s. That would be a wish, not so much a regret.
Well, like Audrey, I very much wanted to write from the time I was sort of this high. But when you sit in front of the family and they say, what do you want to do? Do you want to be a teacher or a nurse or a secretary? I said, no, I want to be a writer like Grandpa, and work on Fleet Street. And they sort of look at you as if, you're slightly screws loose. So the first time I ever actually had anything in print was in the church newsletter, and I wrote a report because I was a Sunday school teacher just to get into teacher training college. I really wasn't that much further into it than that. And I was a bit stupid, really. I took nearly every single copy from the back of the church home to read. So basically nobody else read it at all, I don't think, because I got all the copies in my bedroom, but never mind. So it wasn't until much later when I was sort of writing links for radio that I was writing, but it wasn't writing. I mean, it was just sort of blurb in between programs, and the next program coming up is. So really, I sort of started off with the traditional publishers. I didn't start writing until about 19. No, I wrote my first biography in bits when I had slight downtime, but I didn't publish till 2013. But like you said, Richard, if they'd started it earlier, if I'd known what I was doing for 12 months, I just put it up there and sat back and thought, well, that's it. And nobody bought. Well, I sold 4 copies, I think, in the whole year. Didn't know about the marketing thing and the networking and all this kind of thing. But I'm very grateful to Amazon for allowing us to self-publish, because I think it's absolutely amazing, even if there is a lot of nonsense out there as well. I think they've done us a tremendous service.
Can I just add one thing? That was one of the joys of reading your book when I did, was watching the progression of you as a writer, because you talked about that, how you did the blurbs and everything. And you can just, and it was, because I think that's one thing a lot of writers like to see, or how other writers, got into what they were doing. So that was one of the things, besides those great anecdotes that you had, but one of the things I loved in your book was just watching that progression. So, yeah.
Like a lot of things, I fell into it, and
Yeah,
that's where
but
I
it was
wanted
great
to
to see
fall.
it grow, to see how you made those. Yeah, so definitely
Mm.
enjoyable.
But it wasn't really till I retired that I could sit down and think, can I do a whole book? Can I do a whole novel? And not so much the biography that came out first, but the first Amy book. I mean, I thought, can I really do that? And I know exactly how you feel, Audrey, when it comes through. And, this is my first novel, which doesn't have any of the autobiographies are easy to write because you know what's coming, you know what the stories are. But actually getting through a novel, thinking, hang on a minute, I've now got him in the dungeon and she's up a tree,
Oh gosh,
and
yeah.
where do I go from here? That's the tough part, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I wanted to agree with Richard, but it's interesting that I get to the same conclusion as he does, but in a different way. Richard said he's not a person who has a lot of regrets. I have a lot of regrets in other areas of my life, but when it comes to writing, I don't really have any regrets, because the way I look at it is, if I can write a story and finish it, that's a bonus. That's more than I had before. So anytime I can do that, I don't have any regrets about that thing. Like Richard is, I wish I had started earlier, because I didn't start writing until I was almost 40 years old. I wish I could have figured out a way to figure this out and get started on it earlier in my life. Maybe the reality is I wasn't ready, and anything I might have done before that might not have been worth it. And maybe I started writing when I was finally ready to. So
I think if you look in a lot of well-known writers, I don't mean classical writers, Bertold, I mean those who sell lots and lots and lots of books. You look inside and you'll find that they've worked on ships and they've been a chef, and they've collected rubbish, and they've taught English as a foreign language, but they have had a wealth of different experiences, which I think probably suited them to work into their characters later on.
yeah.
That is true.
But then I do really admire, and I feel panicked by some of these younger people who said, "Oh well, I did 3 blog posts this morning, knocked up
Yeah.
a dozen graphics, and finished another 5 chapters." And I'm thinking, I'm exhausted. I've just got out of bed.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Okay, any more regrets from anyone? No?
I have one more thing to say on basically it's not a regret, but people might ask, like, why is it not a regret? So my first couple of books are, looking back, not really that good. I would, I definitely look at them and think, there's issues there. But I don't regret writing or publishing them at all, because it's like, I look at it as it's necessary to go through that process and write something that you might someday look back and go, that was kind of amateurish. But it's like learning to ride a bike. You can't say, oh, I wish I didn't fall off the bike a few times, because it's just something you have to go through, I think. At least for me. Like, maybe there are some people who just the first thing they write is awesome, but at least for me, it was a learning experience. And so I'm glad I did it.
You
So
know,
don't regret that, even though some people might say that wasn't too good.
I wouldn't regret that, because there are 2 authors I've had contact with, and I loved their first. Actually, one, it was his first book, I believe, and the other was his second book, and they're still like my favorites. Like, if I were, if I can only take 10 books out of the house, those 2 would come with me. But surprisingly, for those authors, they were early works. They're like, oh, I've completely forgotten about that book, or yeah, I don't really, want to. It's funny. So you might think the stuff that you wrote back then might not be that good, but you never know from a reader's point of view. So don't regret it.
which
John,
basically leaves
John,
on, sorry, go on.
oh, go ahead.
No, go on, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, John Grisham, his first novel was A Time to Kill. I absolutely loved that novel. And he was interviewed some years later after he had written more books, and he said he was embarrassed by that. It's like, why would he have been embarrassed by that book? It's an incredible story. It is weird how we view some of our stories compared to, what other readers might think of them. So
I want to go on record to say I will never, never regret my first book. Even if I grow and get better and better and better, no, that's my first child.
Yeah.
Which is really the third question: is that if you had to revamp it and lose all your reviews, would you do that? Audrey, would you?
I thought about rewriting The Friendship of Mortals as a totally different book, like less supernatural, grittier, more more true to the original story of Herbert West, which was actually, you should read Berthold's review of the Lovecraft version, which I sort of took and expanded into a novel. Anyway, I thought about doing that, but I kind of scrubbed that. And mostly laziness and really why bother? And I'm not really sure I could do gritty all that well, to tell you the truth. Like the criminal element and all that sort of thing. So no. Now, I have actually been reading over it just the other day, because I thought I was experimenting with uploading things to the Kindle, because I have both a Kindle and an old Sony e-reader. And I always thought, okay, EPUBs on the Sony, Kindle books on the Kindle, but you can pretty well put anything on a Kindle, and you can email it to yourself. I know, Lucinda, you've spoken about doing that with some of your things, just to proofread them. So I was doing that, and so I've been reading The Friendship of Mortals, and the only thing I think I would like to do is comb through it and take out a lot of instances of the word that.
Yes.
That really is a word that in many cases you can do without, although it sort of slips in there without you knowing it. So I think I'd do that. And maybe, well, once you start tinkering, you could tinker forever. Sharpen up some of the scenes, maybe even delete a few scenes and condense things and make it shorter and tighter and all that. But, really, when you get right down to it, the work is out there, it's published, it is what it is. And I think I'm going to just leave it. And the others too. And if I go on, I'll write other things that hopefully will be better in their way. But I don't think I'm going to bother going back and fiddling around with my existing books.
I think I tend to agree, because I don't know with all the popular authors. I think their early books generally are pretty good, and bit by bit, a lot of them seem to be going downhill. This is just in not only my opinion, but several people that I know that read, and then they're taking on people to write with them, especially older people. I'm talking about Wilbur Smith now, and I don't know whether Grisham has, but quite a lot of them have taken on somebody else, so they're written by somebody else. And I actually think that they've gone past the prime. It's just like going through the curve, and they're now down. So yeah, I agree with you, Audrey. And that is the one word that the first beta reader I ever, well, I didn't have a beta reader when I first published, but somebody got back to me and said, if I were you, I'd go through it again and take out that. I found something like 746,000. And I thought, did she sit down and count them? Because I didn't realize you had word find in those days. I was that stupid. So yeah, she was right. So I did take a whole lot out. But, Richard?
I also go ahead. No, go ahead, Richard.
Oh, go ahead, Mark. No.
No, I'm with both of you, and like I said in response to the last question, when it comes to writing, other than I wish I had started sooner, I don't really feel like I have any regrets about what I've written, and going back and revamping something would suggest that I regretted the original version of that, or what I published. And I basically I see this on Twitter every once in a while, and also in this Facebook group that I belong to, people talking about redoing something in one of their books and republishing it, and do they need a new ISBN number and all this other stuff. But I want to go back to, well, wait, why are you rewriting it and republishing it? And because once I'm done with something, I'm done with it. I don't go back and reconsider it, or, you know, think, is there a better way I could have written this? I'm done. I'm ready to go on to the next thing. So revamping something I've already written, especially something that I've already published, whether it's a short story or a novel, I don't even I don't even consider that.
Well,
So,
Bertold.
oh.
Oh, did you have Richard?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go.
So I discovered that I'm very much the same way as Mark describes, and the only way I discovered that was by I thought I could revamp one of those early books that I had sort of come to think, that wasn't so good. So I thought, yeah, I'll do this, and I pulled up the Word file and I'm looking at it, and I was thinking, how am I going to do this? Where do I start? And I just kept reading through it, and I was like, well, I don't. There were things I wanted to do differently, but it wasn't like I could just change this here and then it would still be out of sync with the rest of it. So it's like, well, then I need to change that. And at a certain point, I realized I'm just going to be writing a new story. And then I thought, well, then I should just do that and not bother with calling it a revamping of it. It's like, no, that was out there. That was what it was. I'd much rather write something that's like a spiritual sequel, you know, not necessarily the same thing, but that has the same feel as a book, than to just revamp the same thing. The one caveat I'll say to that is, I know for like the I haven't read this, to be clear. I want to make that clear up front. But the Twilight series, I understand that at a certain point, the woman who wrote that like released a version of the same book but told from a different character's perspective.
I never heard that.
I believe she did that because, I mean, there was money to be made because it was, you know, a huge phenomenon. So
Yeah.
I, you know, if I was like, I could make several $1 million by rewriting the directorate from somebody else's perspective, maybe I'd consider it. But that's not the only way.
Richard.
Yeah, when I saw the question, I was initially a little confused because I have reissued my books without, you know, republishing them. So they still have the same, you know, the same reviews and everything. And the reason why the first one was because I did that, as you remember from other episodes we've had, I did that mainly for myself, and then I bought copies. I was going to give them to friends. It was kind of a stuff. But then somebody, I don't, still to this day don't know who that is, bought the book, read it, and loved it. And that's when I had this knee jerk, I got to go get rid of all the mistakes in it because there were a lot. So, so I did a pretty big rewrite, but just getting rid of all the errors. You know, it wasn't like I didn't change scenes and do anything like that. And I want to come back to that point as to why I probably wouldn't. But I have done that even with the second book. I found some mistakes. There was small. I don't mind doing that, to go in and make a few edits that are typos and clean them up. But I would never want to change the way a scene plays out, the way part of the plot goes, or even some of the wording I use, because I feel like once somebody's eyes have viewed it and read it, I don't want to take that away, whatever their impression was, whether it's good or not. It's just a weird feeling I have. It's like, all right, you know, if someone else is telling a friend about the book and then they say, oh, and this was my favorite part or whatever, and that person goes to buy it, it's, you know, what's the point, you know? So I don't want to mess with it, whether good or bad. I just want to keep it as there is. But if I did see that that was spelled THAG by mistake and somehow got through the proofreader and everything like that, it was Zag.
I've done the typo fixes as well, but I think
Yeah.
your last point though too, it's kind of like when I write a story and I figuratively type the end, that's it. That was the story that was in my head. That was the story that I wrote.
Yep.
And I'm not going to go back and reevaluate it or reconsider it, or someone says, "Oh, this part was horrible," or whatever. Okay, but that was the story in my head. and I'm not going to go back and try to redo it.
But you change it a bit in editing, would you, Mark?
I'm sorry?
You change it a bit in the editing, would you? The second draft, third draft?
I basically edit a lot while I write. And with most exceptions, you know, I might do some small amount of tinkering once I figuratively type the end, but typically when I type the end, I'm done. Again, with the exception of some tinkering around the edges.
Yeah, error correction to me is a different thing than
Right.
actually rewriting.
Yeah.
Or, you know, because you just like, you know, you've got a typo, so you fix it. So that's making the thing better, and it doesn't really change the story at all. But I think it's saving yourself the embarrassment of having a typo. But where you start to go in and even just taking out a sentence or something, or just slipping in an adjective or taking it, you know, that's and I think that's why I haven't even bothered with going in and taking out that, for instance, because I know if I start on that road, I'll end up doing other things, and then it'll end up being a major change. And for those are very good reasons, Richard, not to do it. So I'm glad you articulated them.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's just you don't know, and it's like to my comment to Berthold earlier, you don't know what your initial readers loved and didn't love, and if they did love something that you think is trivial, I wouldn't want to take that away from somebody. It's the whole point of one of the points of putting your stories out there is hoping somebody gets something out of it. You don't want to change that, and it could be the actual wording of a phrase, like I said, especially in dialogue. So.
I was going to say, I know that most people here are probably not Star Wars fans, but George Lucas famously did a re-release of Star Wars that changed a whole bunch of things. And in many cases, they were things that people liked in the originals, and they didn't like what he did in the re-release. And I worry, you know, if you revamp a book, exactly like Richard said, you might ruin something that someone loved like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, in the area, like, you know, the a lot of these movies now, they're doing director's cuts, and people then are freaking out, and wars are being started over such small stuff, but nonetheless, it shows you sometimes how readers really buy into something and don't, you know, they create a model and they don't want it to change. So, you know, but I don't know. The idea of, again, if I had an idea and I said, wow, you know what, doing a book, whatever, from the perspective of another character, I would just make another book. I mean, you know, it could be interesting. But I think in your case, again, I never read the Twilight series, and as far as movies go, you know.
Movies and books are very different.
This is what
I can go off on that, but I think from what I heard is she had wrote that originally as some kind of fan fiction thing or something like that. It was just a fun thing for her she was doing, and then it got a lot of reads and so she said, okay, I'm going to rework this as an actual, you know, and she took it into another direction. That's what I had read way back on some article before a lot of those movies took off. So I think it was 50 Shades of Grey or something like that she had originally read. And she read something. Yeah.
50 Shades of Grey came out after Twilight.
Oh, it did? So maybe it's the other way around.
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be the other way around.
I think you might be right.
Right. So, all right, it was the other way around. All right. So now, it was 50 Shades of Grey, came out of some fan fiction thing. And okay. All right. Well, thanks for getting that straight in my head.
This is one of the both benefits and drawbacks of having kids is when they start reading books and you want to see what they're reading, you end up reading Harry Potter and Twilight and the Divergent series and Hunger Games and all of those books that your preteen and teenage kids are reading, so you know what they're reading too. And sometimes you even go see the first Twilight movie with your 14-year-old son and his girlfriend.
They start young, don't they?
Yes. What about you,
Sorry.
Lucinda? You haven't answered this question.
What are we talking about?
Revamping in earlier work.
Revamping. I'm very tempted to do the first one again, the eggshell, walking over eggshells again, because I think I could make it a lot better. But I'm probably more, it isn't the full story, it's only part of the story, really. But on the other hand, no, it won a lot of awards, so I just feel that if I changed it over much, then it wouldn't be worth, it might not be up to the standard that it was to start with. And I wouldn't have, although I think a lot of the competitions, the standard's gone up enormously. I'm not sure. I would guess as many awards now as I did then. So no, I think it's best to let it lie. And I think possibly I might even take it down at some point altogether. I think it may have served its purpose. I'm not sure. I don't. It's sad in a way because I had more fun doing the biographies than I have the psych thrillers, but it's the psych thrillers that have been selling. But like you, Audrey, I've reached a brick wall at the moment. I actually haven't done much writing for almost a year now. The next book's in my head. I know exactly where it's going and I just don't. Is it long COVID? I don't know. I just don't have the energy to sit and write. I procrastinate. I find other things to do. I even go and clean cupboards or something, ghastly, or mop floors.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but you are a true writer then.
yeah, indeed. Yeah, I don't have a trajectory for the next one. I sort of know what I want it to be like, but it isn't. I don't know. It hasn't hit the point where I absolutely have to write it. But it took me a long time before I wrote my first book. Like I thought about it for at least 2 years. I think it was sort of percolating back there or fermenting or doing something. And then suddenly an opportunity came up. I think my husband went out of town or something, and I had a couple of days, and it was November, and I, didn't have much to do. And so I just sat down and started. And once I started, it kept going. So maybe that'll happen again, but I don't know. I was a lot younger then, and I suspect age has something to do with this.
I'd rather play long COVID than my very long, long years. It's easier. It's easier. It's my get out clause. I thought we were on what, 45? Is it longer now?
We don't have a time limit. So
Oh, you don't?
Oh.
Okay.
Except I need to
Not
leave in a
editing.
couple minutes.
Oh, you need to leave, Mark? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've let my
But
other half go
you
up
can
to the drinks
continue on without
party,
me.
saying that was him. I'm sorry about the phone. That was him saying, "Where the hell are you?" I think, because I said, "I'll do this first, and then I'll come up and join you afterwards." And because it's outside, you can see that I'm getting well ready to sit outside, because even in October in Spain, it's getting pretty a bit chilly at night. So I'm just actually chatting tonight. I'm really going to sit down on Monday and I'm going to start writing again, because I think you've given me a bit of impetus.
Well, that's good.
I've had a couple of months without writing too, so I'm trying to gear up for that soon as well.
Here's a little tip. I'm a serial procrastinator. I am the king of procrastination. And the reason why I wrote my first book is I was procrastinating from finishing painting, as my story goes. But if you can find something that you need to get done, but is even worse than trying to get yourself to sit in a chair and write, that will trigger you to say, well, you know what? I could do that, but maybe I should get that book started.
Good idea.
I always find something worse that has to get done. So yeah, that will help. By the way, I would like to suggest the topic for next session, at least part of it. I would like to ask a question, which would be anywhere from 1 to 5 authors who are your favorite authors, but why? I would like to know what it is about their writing. And again, if it's just one, if it's, I don't like to make a list where you got to fit into, so 1 to 5. I think more than 5 would be too long for us to talk, but how's that? Why you like your favorite author?
Why don't we, as Lucinda came up with the questions for this session and kind of led the discussion, why don't you do that for the next one?
I will happily do so.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Go forth and write, Lucinda.
Yes.
Yeah,
Halloween,
less cleaning, more writing.
And Audrey, get inspired.
Yes.
Go out, see the world. Just look at things.
yeah.